But what's been fascinating for me is the amount of high level successful men that reach out to me, guys that are like crushing it, guys that are running 7, 8-figure, companies, guys that are doctors, lawyers, CEOs. We've had pastors, like these guys that are out there. Like if you look at their life, very similar to mine, right? It's like you check in the boxes of success, right? You got the business, you got the family, you got all these other pillars. It's like you check these boxes. How the hell does this one thing over here, like you don't have control over that? You're going to tell me that some flashy pixels on a screen are controlling you? So for me, when I bring personal responsibility to the content that I create, it's obviously very clearly directed to a man that is struggling with pornography.
What is the habit or addiction in your life that is inconsistent with the future that you say you want? Do you know how to change it? If there's anything you want to change in your behavior or thinking, this conversation is for you. Hello, my friends. My name is Chad, and this is the Naked Leadership Podcast, high-stakes conversations for relentless company founders. My co-hosts and I have over 6 decades of combined experience in leadership coaching, and this podcast is where we explore it all. There's no conversation too risky. This week, Adrian, Dan, and I sit down with Frank Rich, host of the Superhuman Life podcast and all-around amazing human. Frank is a brilliant entrepreneur and company founder, and he coaches people through addiction. In this conversation, we talk about the antidote to addiction and how we can own our perceptions to change the future. Let's dive in. Gentlemen, it's so good to be with you. Dan, Adrian, so good to see you.
Yeah, so great to be here. Excited for this conversation.
Good to be back.
Good to be back in the conversation. Good to have you, man. This week we have a guest with us, Frank Rich. Frank, we're so grateful that you took the time to sit down, have this conversation with you. This is fun because Adrian's actually going to make an appearance on your podcast that I'm excited to listen to. You guys have teased that conversation to me a little bit, and it really caught my attention. So I'd love for you guys to tease that a little bit too as we go through the conversation. But thanks for being here.
Absolutely, Chad. No, real honor to be with you guys here today. Looking forward to our conversation.
So I want to start where we always start, which is your story. What brings you to this conversation? What's your background?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that, Chad. For me, I think what would bring me here today. Well, I host a podcast, right? You kind of mentioned it there. We got an amazing conversation coming up with Adrian pretty soon, where we dived into leadership, some of the things we agreed upon. And it was interesting because I think there were a couple things that maybe we saw a little bit differently. So that was a really great conversation. Hopefully you guys can check that out in the audience as well. For me, so, I've been in entrepreneurship, running businesses, starting businesses for 10 years. But if we even go, 10 years prior to that, almost right out of not high school, but 2 years post high school, like I got thrusted into some pretty high level leadership training and sales. So this is dated like early 2000s. I was part of a very large wireless company with about 500 locations across the country. And at the time I was overseeing the Southwest Florida division for sales and management training. So very young age, I had quite a bit of responsibility on the professional side of things, but with that came a lot of very intense training. So I learned neurolinguistic programming, I learned sales, persuasion, influence, running teams, managing multiple locations. I mean, I think we had about 60 employees at the time spread across 12 locations. So a lot of responsibility for a very, very young man. 20s, I kind of bounced around, some sales positions, spent a little bit of time in executive recruiting towards the end of my 20s. And then at the age of 30s when I started my first company, which was a ticket brokerage. So we bought and sold concert tickets, sporting events, theater shows, kind of on the entertainment side of things. We did VIP special packages, really trying to create, meaningful and significant experiences for people, whether it was at sports or concerts or whatnot. Ran that company for 5 years from 2013 to 2018. Very small operation. It was me and, a handful of part-time staff, but we were able to, do a couple $1 million in gross sales, which, for somebody without a college degree, early 30s, first company, like was quite a bit of success. shifting in the marketplace kind of brought that almost to an end. It was really getting squeezed out by the bigger players. Most people are aware of your StubHubs, your Vivid Seats, your Ticketmasters, Ticket Network. Those were the guys that were really trying to squeeze out the smaller guys like me. So I foresaw an end to that business, and that's when I got into the online marketing side of things. So I started Frank Rich Fitness, an online fitness coaching company, in 2017, and that really thrust me into the digital marketing space. So learning Facebook ads, learning social media, content creation, so forth, and that's really what I've been focusing on the business side of things for the last 5 or 6 years. So running Frank Rich Fitness, I also helped start a marketing agency in 2019 that we worked with 7 and 8 figure business owners, overseeing their entire marketing strategy. So literally from marketing strategy creation all the way through the creative development, writing sales copy, graphic design. It was pretty much a done for you full service agency in 2019 and 2020. And then for the last 2.5, 3 years, I've been hosting the podcast, The Superhuman Life. And then in 2020, January of that year, I started a company helping men overcome pornography addiction, which was really a byproduct of my own personal journey. But that's been the main focus for me business-wise, is building up and scaling Rebuilt Recovery for the last 2.5 years. And we do that through a massive content, media strategy. We have free books, free offers, courses, coaching programs, one-on-one group coaching, so forth and so forth. And we just launched a mastermind here last month. So yeah, kind of quick, 30,000 overfoot view of, I guess, my professional journey here.
You've lived a few lives.
A couple of them, yeah.
That was no short story, man. That's great. I just want to make sure, I have so many questions already, but I want to make sure we don't gloss over. So your podcast, Superhuman Life.
The Superhuman Life.
Yep. The Superhuman Life. Great. And then the porn recovery program is Rebuilt Recovery. Is that
Rebuilt Recovery? Yes.
Awesome. Do you mind why did you start Rebuilt Recovery? Do you mind talking about that for just a minute?
Yeah, man. No, well, so the podcast for me was really the beginning. It was kind of the genesis of everything. So, this was, I don't need to tell you guys, the depth of my, 20-year porn addiction. There's plenty of those conversations out there. But let's just say I had a really bad pornography addiction. It really had a grip on me for, I say 20 years, but it was really probably the last 5 years, probably right around the time I started my first company. It became a way to cope with stress, manage, just a lot of pressure that I was going through. And as somebody that was, running his business from home at the time, became very easy. So it got pretty intense, in terms of my struggle, really towards the end of 2018, because at that time, one company is kind of coming to an end. I had made some poor financial kind of decisions in and around there. The other company was just trying to get off the ground. I'm in kind of a struggling relationship. So 2018 became a really tough year. A big part of my story has been my faith. So I did find my faith in late 2018, and that was a big part of the journey that I've been on since then. A few months after, finding my faith is when I really came face to face with myself. I was trying to build an online fitness company, and when you're talking about fitness, you're trying to help people, whether it's through training, getting in shape, like there's always this element of personal development, right? I mean, even in kind of what you guys are doing here, it's leadership kind of tied into personal development. Like, so I'm trying out there to help people improve the quality of their life. But I'm struggling so much internally. Like I had this, almost like just talk with myself one morning in the mirror, like, Frank, you're an absolute fraud. How are you going to help people become the best version of themselves when you're struggling? You have these secrets, addictions, and behaviors that are, literally controlling your life.
The double life.
You're lying to your girlfriend. Yeah. You talked about, you said at the beginning, right? I lived multiple lives. Well, I gave you one side of that entire 20 years. There was a whole nother double life that I was living. And I know Adrian, can resonate with this. You do that long enough, man. It really builds a deep hole inside. And I just had a point where it was like, I decided I needed to take personal responsibility for everything that I'd done. So after kind of understanding, the real depth of pornography addiction and how it was impacting my brain, I was able to see the tie to some of the struggles that I was going through, social anxiety, depression, like very dark thoughts, like all tied to the things that I was consuming. So when I made the decision in February of 2019 to quit, it was because I wanted more for my life. And I knew that the only way for me to get there was to begin to take responsibility and begin to just tell truth to everybody. So I went through this, literally like Rolodex of all of my friends. And I just opened up and I said, hey man, you know me for 5 years, these parts about me, but what you don't know is this. And it was amazing because every time I shared it with somebody, it was like this pressure that I had put on myself got a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter, because I was never condemned. I was never shamed from another individual. All the shame in my life was brought on upon by me. And when people began to accept me, it was like, wow, okay, like I can be free. I can actually be who Frank is supposed to be. So my life changed, over those next 3 to 4 months. That's February of 2019. The podcast for me started first, Chad. That was to share what I had gone through. Like, as somebody that had succeeded in corporate America, had succeeded in entrepreneurship, had done bodybuilding. I mean, there's a whole other part of my story where I competed as a high-level bodybuilder for 10 years that I didn't even talk about. So I had the tools to change my body. I had the tools to change other people. But how the hell did I struggle with a pornography addiction in the depths that I did? So I wanted to talk about this because maybe there was other people out there in the world. And I didn't know at the time how big this thing really was. So I started a podcast literally to share my story and have conversation with others with hope that it would inspire somebody else. At that time, I was very deep into building the marketing company. Like that was what I was focused on doing professionally. As the podcast began to grow, we got recognized by Apple in the first couple of months, like new and noteworthy. We began to get some traction. The messages I began to receive from people like on social media changed because I was still running the fitness business. So there were still people that would reach out. Thank you for your programs, helping me get big, strong, lean, jacked, whatever it was. Those messages would still come, but people hearing the podcast would be, Frank, thank you for your willingness to address these taboo topics. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing how you've been able to overcome this. A couple of months go by, people start saying, Frank, can you help me? And at first, like I had no clue, like how to do this. Like, I don't know, like listen to what I'm talking about and then maybe go apply it. Well, those messages became a lot more regular. And just through, incredible people and mentorship in my life, they're like, Frank, there's something there for you. Like you went through everything you went through to get to this point. You need to figure out a way to help these men. So I started Rebuild Recovery really out of a need because people were calling upon for it.
Thanks, man. Thanks for telling that story. It's powerful. It's really powerful. You you mentioned needing to take personal responsibility, and when we got connected, as I was kind of looking at some of your content and what you were about, trying to get a feel, there was a very clear through line for me around this idea of personal responsibility, and I was like, okay, this would be gold for a conversation around what is personal responsibility. I almost hear it, this is way too simplified of an assessment, but to me, what I heard in your story is almost that for you, personal responsibility was an antidote to the addiction. And I don't want to put that on you, but I'm just wondering, like, is that a theme? And when you talk about personal responsibility, what are you talking about?
Yeah, that's very well said, Chad. Man, I'm like, I'm gonna swipe that and use that a little bit later on. The antidote to addiction is personal responsibility. I think that's it, man. It's been fascinating for me to hear from and have as many conversations with men as I do at all walks of life. I get the young kids that reach out every once in a while. These guys are, they've been really looking at this thing since they were 12, 13 years old, and now they're 20 or in their early 20s. And it's like, they don't know any other way of life. But what's been fascinating for me is the amount of high level successful men that reach out to me, guys that are like crushing it, guys that are running 7-8 figure, companies, guys that are doctors, lawyers, CEOs. We've had pastors, like these guys that are out there. Like if you look at their life, very similar to mine, right? It's like you check in the boxes of success, right? You got the business, you got the family, you got all these other pillars. It's like you check these boxes. How the hell does this one thing over here, like you don't have control over that? You're going to tell me that some flashy pixels on a screen are controlling you? So for me, when I bring personal responsibility to the content that I create, it's obviously very clearly directed to a man that is struggling with pornography. So and I understand that, right? I understand that when I'm talking to a camera, for a piece of content, like I'm talking to one individual, I'm talking to the guy that is maybe playing victim in his life, and you see this a lot in addiction, right? 12 steps, which has done more good for addiction recovery than any other organization in the world. I have a problem with their first step. I don't believe that we give our power over to something else. I think we recognize at the beginning that maybe we're allowing something else to control us. But if you raise your hand every single day, which is something they do in any 12 steps of program, and you say, I'm powerless and I'm surrendering myself to this addiction, I'm going to call upon a higher power. But even in that powerless feeling, for me, that's injecting like a victim mindset, a victim mentality. So for me, the personal responsibility in our content, the way that I talk about it is, no, you are not powerless. You are making a choice and decision, whether it's running to pornography or talk about any addiction, running to a bottle, running to drugs, sex, gambling, choice made on you. And if you're going to say that something outside of yourself is causing you to do that, that's living in a victim mindset, and that's passing off the responsibility. So that's kind of how I, bring it, I guess, into our worlds.
Yeah. Dan, Adrian, I'd love to hear from you. What are you thinking?
I so resonate with the message, and I'm always curious. The word personal responsibility. What other kind of responsibility is there? That's the first thing that not that that's not on you. Just it's a cultural thing. People say personal responsibility, but I don't. Taking responsibility for my life is personal. It is. And one of the things that occurred to me is I've come out of an addiction background as well. So is Adrian. And in my journey back, and I had a double life, much like yours, but was really underground, drug ridden, guns and craziness, and then laundering money back in through an official business, and basically living a double life that my wife didn't know about, but I know she had, later on, of course, she had intuitions. As we took responsibility for how we put the life together, we came across that. And one of the things that occurred to me was in taking responsibility is like, it occurred to me very clearly recently reading a book called Deviate, that the way we change our future is by changing our past, the way we relate to our past. And he calls it the future past. He says the brain, and this really clicked for me, and it connects to what you were saying, that the brain actually automatically derives what was useful from the past. That's how it determines its current action. And the way to change the future is by first changing my relationship to the past. Like how am I relating to the past? Because if I change my narrative about the past, my brain automatically will find new things that worked in the past that will alter the future that's coming. And one of the ways I related to that was how I related to women. In my journey with my wife, I got very clear about how I related to women because after I confessed to her, and we were talking, we made an agreement. She was, we didn't split up. She said we basically lived in separate rooms for about a year, 9 months. And we were going to decide from there because we had a boy. He was a little kid. He was like 9 months old. And when this all came down, and in relating to her, I realized that a lot of my actions towards her were related to how I had thought about women. My mother was a schizophrenic, so I was, I looked at women as not to be trusted. So I was constantly keeping a woman on the side for a while in the early part of our relationship. And I couldn't understand why I did that. As I started to relate to the past differently, and all of a sudden that desire disappeared. I reinvented the relationship I had with the past, which altered how I could be with my wife. And it's been 40 years since I've had any kind of attraction to another woman other than, what's a legitimate, oh, she's beautiful, I could tell my wife about that. But I just don't indulge in that thinking. But it's interesting when you talk about responsibility. Part of that was owning how I had already framed women in this particular case up, and how that was impacting my engagement with my wife. And when that came up just out of a dialogue with her, where I was suspecting her when she was completely authentic. And then when I saw how authentic she was, I was convicted, like, where did this suspicion come from? And it was in that inquiry that the past opened up that way. So I don't know if that made any sense, but it really, when you were talking, that's what it triggered in me.
I love that so much. Wrote that book down, Deviate. And Dan, I want to hijack this interview right now and ask Dan like 6 follow-up questions on it, whatever he just shared. But maybe we'll bring on the super in life for me to do that. I love what you said, man. I love what you said. And, I get men that come into our program, right? And, they instantly go to, this sexual thing happened in the past, or this trauma associated, and they hold on to, this happened in the past. It caused this chain of events in my life. And this is how I've landed here today. And they accept that they can't go back and change the past. But I love what you said, because you need to change your perception of the story. You need to change how you're telling that narrative to yourself. And it's in that change of how you're perceiving whatever happened that's going to unlock to you what you need to do now to move forward. And I always ask these guys, like, how do you need to perceive that past event to be able to create the future life that we want to have? And if we can get really clear on that narrative, right, that we have to tell ourselves from whatever events it was that occurred, whether it was sexual abuse, whatever it was, how do you need to perceive that now to empower you through responsibility to be able to create the life that you want?
And that's where the victim story is in that past.
Yes.
Like, somehow this happened to me, or there's some place where I had nothing to do with it. I just became this.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's very easy to live there because you can just pass it off, and then you don't have to take any responsibility.
That's what I was going to say. That victim frame is not ownership. I mean, you still own it. You're still creating that perception, but you pretend like you don't create it, right? And so you're not taking ownership of what you have created, whereas actually forming a perception of the past events is taking that ownership. It is taking responsibility. This is how I bring it into my life. This is how I think about it for the future that I want to create.
That's cool. I've got lots of thoughts here too. I'm thinking about folks that might be listening here that maybe porn's not their thing, but I do get that everybody finds some way to deal with reality. There are lots of healthy ways to deal with reality, and there are lots of maybe innocuous ways to deal with reality. Like I eat pistachios every night in bed. The hot chili ones, they're so good. They're so good. I always want to stop. I just can't stop myself. I'm going to call you Frank, and I got to talk about it because I pound some red hot. Anyway, there's also
first step is don't take the pistachios into the bedroom.
No, I love them. I need them, Frank. You're so unempathetic. You don't know me. But when I was seven, no, just kidding. No, but there are some crossover, and I mean, one of the bigger, I guess, themes of this for me, Frank, you really represent you've had your own journey of being willing to stop settling for what's the word? Contaminated life. I would maybe say it that way. Like, you had a lot of great stuff going on, but there's shit in the soup. I'll just keep eating the soup. I like the soup, but there's shit in it. Okay, fine. I'll just keep eating it. And you took a stand for cleaning up or turning on the lights or whatever you want to call it, metaphorically, and wondered, and then got real, and then have built, a life in the light, or building that, right? That's an ongoing. And it gets dark, and then it gets light, and it gets dark, and it gets light, whatever. So, and there are probably other folks that may be coming and say, I don't know, not this, but like, this isn't a specific thing, but talk about where as people come to you, which takes a lot of guts for them to reach out to you, right? It takes a lot of guts to say, hey, Frank, here's what I'm going through. Thanks for sharing your story. And then they might sneak in hey, by the way, I struggle with some stuff similarly or whatever. What do you think it takes for someone to do that?
To reach out?
Yeah. I mean, reaching out might be a third or fourth step in the process is what I'm pointing to. Like, I'm really curious about, where, as you've seen it and studied it and now participated with it with yourself and for others, like, as for anybody that's listening right now, if they've got something going on in their life that they're questioning about around the health of it, the impact of it, like walk through kind of where somebody's at before they reach out to you and just give some kind of view of the map, if you will, around some of those decisions and some of those perspectives.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Adrian. And if there's a guy or a woman, listening right now and you're having those thoughts and you're having those doubts and those questions, now is the time to reach out, because it's been my experience. You asked the question, like, and I think the way that I heard is like, what does it take for a guy to reach out? And unfortunately, in 3 years of doing this now, and 1,000+ consultation calls and hundreds of men gone through our program, oftentimes what is the catalyst for that is some form of consequence in their life. Whether it's a consequence within a relationship, a consequence, maybe they've already, wife has separated them, they're sleeping in separate rooms now, or girlfriend found out and now they're separated, or fiance found out and now the engagement is off, or they got caught at work, or so usually it's the consequence that has become the catalyst. So if you're already like aware enough that, hey, maybe there's some unhealthy behaviors, and it doesn't have to be pornography, right? It could be a slew of things. Obviously, we know the big ones, right? Drugs, sex, gambling, alcohol, pornography, like those are kind of at the top of the spear. But I wouldn't point at, pistachios, but if there's a binge eating of ice cream type of things, like if you're a person, I know people like this in the fitness industry. I spent a decade, high level bodybuilding, have a lot of, pro friends. I've, know people that walked across, the Olympia stage and whatnot. You see a lot of people in the fitness industry, though. These are kind of the 2-day, 2 times a day gym goer, right? They're 3 hours in the gym. And then what you don't know is that same person is eating themselves to sleep every single night with a pint of ice cream. So, what could be perceived as like a healthy individual is really using the training as a coping mechanism, because the reality is that they want to sit at home and binge eat on ice cream every night. So if you've already reached that point where it's like you have some awareness that maybe there's some unhealthy behaviors in your life, now is the time to reach out. And it doesn't have to be to a professional. Oftentimes find somebody in your life that you can entrust in. For men, it's an uncle type of figure, right? It's a bigger brother. Even if you're in your 50s or 60s, find somebody that doesn't have to be older, but more senior in an area of your life that maybe you're struggling with, and just reach out and have the conversation with them. Because if you're not talking about something in your life that you're struggling with, that means that behavior or that thing has power over you, because you're not discussing it. You're thinking about it all the time. And those thoughts are just going to cause guilt, shame, and just this feeling of like, am I worthy? These type of thoughts. So I would say if you're having that awareness already, like now is the time to talk to somebody, because what I've seen is most times it's the consequences.
Let's say I'm a guy out there, I'm listening to this, and it could be, I mean, this applies to a lot of things. I mean, it applies to business. I mean, if I have a situation where I'm having a conversation in my head about my partner and I'm starting to do nefarious things because I'm suspecting my partner, or I'm setting up for an anticipated betrayal, or I'm going lame, or I'm working with a company and I'm quietly quitting. Those are things like at what kinds of behavioral, what kinds of experiences come up that people need to pay attention to that would clue them in to the fact that there's a future coming, that if they don't take care of it now, we have what we call the shit hors d'oeuvre principle. It comes as an hors d'oeuvre, and if you don't eat it, it comes back as a sandwich. And then if you don't eat that, it comes back as a 2-course, 3-course buffet, and so on. Like what are some of the signs that I ought to take care of this before it takes care of me?
Yeah, well, I think if you're, if you're not operating out of a core set of values and principles in your life, integrity, honor, like, these real important traits, principles, values that you live by, like if you don't have that as a foundation, I think those things that you were just kind of referencing, like that's where those things are going to manifest. But especially within a company, like if there's a core set of beliefs or values that the company is built upon and the founder CEO is operating from within those, your internal conscious is going to tell you like you're out of alignment. So I think that is going to be the clear signal, right? Is like, does this feel in alignment with who I am and who this company is trying to become? So yeah, I don't know if I directly answered it, but I would see the lack of a set of values being where those type of things would manifest in a business type of setting. But if you have that, I think your conscience is going to speak to you
Yeah,
there.
it kind of goes to the old saying, if you don't believe in something, you fall for anything. That's what I hear you saying. Like what you believe in is going to inform where you are, what future's coming. So
The only constant in an organization like yours is change. I want to take just a second to tell you about The Change Imperative, an ebook written by our very own Dan Tacchini. Let me ask you, how do you personally relate to change in your business? Does it feel like a threat at times? Does it ever feel like you can't keep up with it or it never happens fast enough? Are there certain players on your team that resist change and keep your company stuck? Growth, change, and transition, these intersections often come with confusion, frustration, and resistance. You can flip those experiences into clarity, confidence, and alignment with the Change Imperative ebook. The Change Imperative is instructions for innovating with your team. Go ahead and click on the link in the show notes to get your free copy of the Change Imperative now and feel confident about creating the change in your company necessary to take it to the next level.
Yeah, well, your beliefs are, eternally what are driving, your actions on a daily basis. You come back even further, right? It's going to be your thoughts. Thoughts drive your beliefs. Beliefs drive your actions. Your actions create your habits. Your habits then produce the reality.
Yeah, it's that out of alignment or knowing that you're not working towards the future you say you want, right? That discontent. Frank, your answer reminded me of a conversation I had with a client yesterday. Works with a international brand, really well known. He works in art direction, and he's building a team. He's kind of rebuilding a team, coming into a new position. And he was telling me about some of the players that he inherited. That's his words, not mine. He inherited some of these players that just aren't up to snuff. And his and I conversation went to what's your stand, man? Like, what is the standard for the team? You don't know the standard in the agreements. And once you're clear on the standard in the agreements, those people who aren't up for it will eventually weed themselves out, because they are going to feel the discontent of not being aligned for the future that you're going to, right? The level of transparency, the level of accountability that's going to be required to play on your team, they can't hang.
Yeah. Can't hide.
And yeah, you can't hide. And
not even from yourself, right?
Right. And especially from yourself.
Yeah.
Eventually.
I mean, that's where it starts. That's where the lie begins. And at least in my experience, I lie to myself and then I lie to others.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was going to say. Just thinking about, when listening to Jordan Peterson lecture, I don't know, a few weeks ago now. And he's quite eloquent about many things. One of the things he was talking about how many versions of ourselves we have over time. And I'm thinking about that as a connection to what Chad was saying, and having my own dark days of addiction, and realized how essentially at least two guys there, the public one and the private one, and wondering even if this is the weird thought that just comes to my mind, if we see ourselves as a team, like if I see myself, I am a team unto myself. Like there is ambitious Adrian, there's likable Adrian, there's like total steamroller dickhead Adrian, there's like cowardly, there's like all these different I don't know, moods, personas, definitely different visions. that are going on that produce that type of mindset and that type of behavior. And as I guess an invitation to those that are listening that might be kind of silently suffering, I would, like when you're going through something and you're working really hard not to notice how bad it really is, or not to notice, or not, kind of minimizing or justifying, like anybody that's got any kind of addiction going on, you're spending a lot of time trying to make it okay so you can keep it up. And you're really tolerating a really poor performer on your team. The equivalent to that, like, there's a part of you that's like really kick ass. If you're listening to this, there's a huge part of you that's a really kick ass, the one that you're really proud of, and the one that you talk about, and the one you present publicly. And there might be versions of yourselves or moods you're in or patterns or habits or whatever, where you've just decided this is the person I've inherited. And I'll just try to make the most of this person. And my invite is that, if you've got those feelings already, we love leaders here. So we love you. And we don't usually get in these types of topics on this podcast. So it's worth having this conversation, that if you're wondering if it's bad enough to get help, it already is.
Yeah. Right. That's a great standard right there.
It's like, that's what they say in AA. If you're saying, I'm wondering if I'm drinking too much, then you already are. Most people don't ask that. People that have a regular relationship to alcohol don't ask themselves if they drink too much. Like people that have a abnormal relationship to alcohol are the ones that have already, you're already in some of those categories. So anyway, my strong invite is just to double down on what Frank was saying earlier, is, suffering with someone is exponentially better than suffering alone. Because it might be a long road. It might be a long road out. It might not be. It might be a very short road out. That was my experience of getting through all my shit. It wasn't a long road at all. It was actually just, it took a clear decision. And as soon as I asked for help, I had buttressed my life with people that were committed to me, and it shifted on a dime. But that's part of the lie that we live with is, we've built this really, we've built a whole 20-year story, and oh shit, if I decide no, it's going to be a 20-year exit. Well, not the case. Doesn't have to be the case. But you only want to do that as if you're really committed to life and you're not willing to settle for the despair. But my strong invite as a guy that's walked through that journey is like, and waited way too long. I mean, whatever, you wait as long as you need to wait. But if I think back on it now, like when I could have intervened and taken the risk, which was just simply a confession, like, hey, I'm struggling. That's how the conversation begins. So anybody that's listening, we love you and want you to really have the life you want, and any kind of toleration of anything less is going to, you're hamstringing yourself. So from multiple people on this call or in this podcast that, have walked through this. So we're here for you.
I really love the frame that you use there, Adrian, with like the multiple, I don't want to say personalities, but like the multiple people within us, right? The ambition driven, the kind of chill, like, framing it that way though ties in obviously the topic of your guys' podcast, right? Leadership, because we look at ourselves as a team that we must lead and manage first. That then creates that kind of individual leadership that if you're going to effectively lead others, you have to start with leading yourself. And I think that frame there, like, it's a great way to frame up the topic of individual leadership, because you have to master your personal leadership first. And if there's an area in your life that you're not fully taking responsibility, or, I've inherited this person, like, the inheritance is like, now we're a victim. Like we've been given this, and it's out of our responsibility to be able to change, or out of our ability to change it. So I love the frame there of how we have to manage our own kind of internal team.
Well, this has been a rich conversation, no pun intended. I say that almost every time, and now I'm thinking, wow, that was interesting.
In the future, he's going to say, "This has been a very frank, rich conversation."
Yeah, hey, it's all right, guys, because I was interviewed on Monday by somebody else, and the entire conversation, she just called me Rich. Like, she literally introduced me as, "Hey guys, I'm here with Rich," and I'm like, should I correct her? And I was like, you know what? Having this name for 39 years, like it's not the first time.
The man with two first names.
Yeah, the man with two first names. Frank, thanks so much, man. Such an added gift to the conversation here, and a new voice and an opportunity for reflection. I know that this isn't. I know we're drawing parallels to leadership, and I know this isn't directly about or isn't around the typical content that we have, but anything that recognizes people who are suffering and the love that we have for them, and the possibility that's out there for them, both in this conversation and the conversations that they have in their life. I welcome with open arms, and I'm grateful that you brought this conversation to our podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys. This was an incredible conversation, dialogue. I have a lot of respect, and I love what you guys are creating here. And I think, these type of conversations are not often in the business realm, but they might be some of the most important ones. So I have a business partner in our mastermind, Larry Yach. He's a founder of SEAL Team Leaders. They work with high-level executives in a division of their company, like helps companies scale through the healing of trauma of CEOs. Oftentimes, the guys that have to reach the top, they do it through sheer grit and just pushing through, because they just push down all of the stories that they're telling themselves. So I think sometimes like this has to come out. So tons of love and respect for what you guys are doing here. And it's been an incredible honor joining you guys today. Thank you.
I want to point people again to the Superhuman Life podcast. Is there an episode in particular that you're like particularly proud of that you would point people to?
Man,
besides the one that's going to come out on December 26th.
Yeah, the episode dropping on the 26th. I think that's 158. I mean, I've been proud of all of them. Episode 1 really impacts the story of what we've been able to create there, or what started everything. For this audience, I would point you to, I think it's 128 with Larry Yach, the founder of SEAL Team Leaders. So we get into leading your teams, leading your family, leading your organization. Larry wrote the book called How Leadership Actually Works. He spent 10 years as a lieutenant within SEAL Team 3, leading some of the most aggressive missions in the world with 100% success rate. So he understands and sees leadership like nobody else in the world. So yeah, episode 128, Lead Your Family Like a Navy SEAL, Lieutenant Larry Yach.
Go check it out, my friends. That's great. I put you on the spot with that request, but I appreciate your promise. And I always love directing people to a singular place so that they could really know where to start. So appreciate it, Frank. Thank you so much, man.
You're awesome.
Thanks, Frank.
Bye, everybody. Well, my friends, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Naked Leadership Podcast. As a heads up, every Friday we post a Cliff Notes version of that week's conversation with all the highlights in under 5 minutes. Check that out for a quick and powerful reminder of the principles discussed. I hope this conversation has been valuable to you. If it has, the greatest compliment you could pay us is sharing it with somebody who could use it. Thanks so much for listening, and until next week, bye-bye, everybody.